Her daughter slammed the kitchen door shut and turned the lock. "Go fast tonight, Mom," she said, holding the keys like a threat. Susan Bennett, retired CPA and widow, didn't argue. By morning, she owned the house, the locks, and her daughter's fancy new fridge. She'd raised her with discipline and decency, not for power games. Now, the deed would remind her who really built this home. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Ruth Palmer didn't knock. She never had to before. She stepped into the narrow hall that connected the converted garage to the main house, her worn slippers brushing against the cold tile floor. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted garlic, warm, inviting, unmistakably dinner. But as she reached the door that led into the kitchen, she paused. The knob didn't turn. She blinked, tightened her fingers around it, and tried again, slower this time. Still locked. From the other side of the door, she heard Megan's voice, muffled but unmistakably smug. "We're doing a cleanse. You have soup in your room, right?" There was no reply expected, no apology offered, just a statement, cheerfully clinical, as if announcing the weather. Ruth let go of the doorknob and took a slow breath, eyes lingering on the painted trim. The door had been replaced last year, part of Megan's ongoing modernization, and the glossy white finish hadn't yet chipped. It was pristine, just like the rest of the kitchen, just like the rules. She turned around, careful not to let her feet scrape against the floor too loudly, and walked back the way she came. The hallway light flickered as she passed under it, casting a brief golden shimmer on the family photos still hanging on the wall. Most of them were of Megan and Doug, all smiles and matching sweaters, taken in places Ruth had never been invited to. The converted garage still held a chill no space heater could fix. It wasn't that the room was cold. Megan had made sure the insulation was up to code when she generously offered to let Ruth move in, but it never felt warm. The air always seemed to hang, motionless, like a pause that had gone on too long. She walked to the kitchenette and opened the mini fridge. Inside sat a single can of organic lentil soup, dented on one side, with a faded sticker from some boutique grocery Megan liked to brag about. Ruth squinted at the expiration date. January 2023. It was July now. She set the can on the counter and reached for the microwave. The old thing made a low mechanical whir, louder than it should have, and the turntable didn't spin properly anymore. The smell of faint rust mixed with the soup's bland scent, making the room feel even smaller. As the microwave buzzed, Ruth turned to the window. Through its high pane, she could see into the main house. The kitchen gleamed in the warm light of pendant lamps. Megan sat at the island, barefoot, legs curled onto the stool like a teenager, laughing at something Doug had just said. He was carving what looked like roast chicken, a glass of wine balanced in one hand. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his watch glinting each time he moved his wrist. They looked like a magazine ad. Clean, curated, perfect. Ruth let her eyes rest on them for a moment, not with longing, but with the kind of detachment one gives to something irreversibly unfamiliar. She had once cooked in that kitchen. She had helped Henry install the first cabinets there. She had chosen the original tile backsplash with her own hands. Now she wasn't allowed through the door. The microwave beeped once. She didn't move. Instead, she crossed the room to the old oak filing cabinet that sat wedged between the wall and her twin bed. It had been Henry's. She hadn't touched it since the day he died. She tugged open the top drawer. It stuck halfway, and she had to jiggle it with both hands before it gave way with a dry metallic creak. Inside, nothing had changed. Neatly labeled folders, Henry's handwriting in blue ink. Calm, steady, methodical. She pulled one at random, flipping it open to reveal mortgage receipts, correspondence with a bank from over a decade ago. Below that, another folder marked simply, Estate, Drafts. Ruth sat down, the unopened soup cooling beside her on the counter. She scanned the papers slowly, each line soaking into her like rain into dry soil. Her name appeared more than once, and not as a footnote. From the kitchen window, more laughter. This time Megan's high, performative cackle rose above the rest, followed by Doug's deep-throated chuckle. The clinking of plates, the hum of the dishwasher. Ruth closed the folder. She leaned back in her chair, her hands resting loosely on her lap. For a long time, she didn't move. The silence in the room wasn't peaceful, but it was familiar. A silence that had lasted years, one that had pressed itself into her skin without asking. Her eyes drifted back to the locked door. She smiled, faintly, not out of amusement, out of certainty. "She thinks the door is the only thing that locks," she said to no one in particular, voice calm, almost amused. "But I still know where the hinges are." The crackers were stale. Ruth knew it the second she bit into one. Dry, crumbling at the edges, with that faint, powdery taste of something long past its best. Still, she placed another on the paper napkin beside her. There were 3 left in the sleeve. She decided she'd eat them all. Not because she was hungry, but because they were hers. She sipped lukewarm water from a glass with a slight crack in the rim. The window beside her rattled faintly in the evening wind, a reminder that her quarters were still more garage than home. The kitchen light beyond the locked door had been turned off now, replaced by the soft glow of hanging sconces over the living room mantel. Ruth reached for her phone. The contact list had gotten shorter in recent years, by choice and by nature. But Lana Reynolds was still there, tucked under L, like a reliable chapter in a book she'd never returned to the library. She dialed. It rang twice. "Ruth?" Lana's voice came through, gentle and alert. "Everything okay over there?" There was a pause, just long enough to let the air between them settle into something familiar. "Do you remember Henry's will?" Ruth asked. Lana didn't respond right away. The silence on the other end was thoughtful, not surprised. "I do," she said finally. "And I remember whose name was on the first version?" Ruth leaned back slightly, a quiet weight lifting behind her ribs. She hadn't told Lana about the filing cabinet yet, hadn't told anyone really, but they both knew what hung in the air between those words. "I think I need to see it again," Ruth said softly. "The original. I think it might still be here." "You think?" Lana replied, with just the right amount of knowing. "Or you know?" Ruth didn't answer. She didn't need to. They said goodnight not long after. No talk of plans, no dramatic promises, just a simple, shared understanding that something had shifted. She placed the phone face down on the table. Across the room, the filing cabinet sat slightly ajar, its metal edge catching the light like an unblinking eye. Ruth moved toward it slowly, lifting one folder, then another, until she found it, thicker than the rest, tucked beneath a utility bill from 2011 and a yellowing Christmas card from a cousin who'd stopped writing years ago. The envelope had Henry's name on it in black ink, not typed, handwritten. Inside, a full copy, stamped, initialed, with her name underlined more than once. Primary holder, Ruth A. Palmer. She stood there for several minutes, just holding the document. Her fingers brushed the page edges like she was afraid it would vanish. A buzz from her phone broke the quiet. She picked it up. It was a photo Megan had just posted, on her public account no less. A candlelit table, 2 wine glasses, plates perfectly arranged with what looked like duck confit and wild rice. The caption read, "Dinner for 2, finally." A small heart emoji followed. No tag, no mention of Ruth. Just smug punctuation on a night deliberately staged without her. Ruth took a screenshot, saved it. She created a new folder in her phone's photo albums and named it with deliberate care, Access and Exclusion. Then she tucked the phone away and slid the original will back into its folder, sealing it carefully inside a new envelope this time, one she labeled herself in steady, unshaking handwriting. She locked the filing cabinet for the first time in years. As she stood to return to the kitchenette, she heard footsteps just outside her door. Firm, too casual to be Megan's. Doug. He didn't knock, just paused long enough to be heard, and said with a casual coldness, "Hey, just ahead. Sup? Don't grab anything from the main fridge, okay? We've got perishables going for the cleanse." Ruth didn't respond. She simply stared at the door after his footsteps faded, her face calm, unreadable. She reached for the last cracker, but instead of eating it, she tossed it in the trash. Then she walked back to her chair, sat down with the envelope in her lap, and looked at the door again. There was something steady building behind her eyes now. Something quiet but irreversible. The next morning, the sky over Peoria was washed in slate gray, thick clouds dragging across it like dust cloths pulled over forgotten furniture. Ruth sat by the narrow window in her room with a mug of lukewarm coffee and a legal pad balanced on her knee. The envelope containing Henry's original will sat on the table nearby, weighted beneath her reading glasses. She'd barely slept, and yet her body felt awake in a way it hadn't in years. Not restless, just aware, like something important had turned over in her soil, like it was time to stop pulling weeds and start measuring the roots. She dialed Trevor's number before she could second-guess herself. "Trevor Marks," came the crisp voice on the line, a soft hum of background office noise trailing behind him. "It's Ruth Palmer," she said. "I need a few answers about some property paperwork from a while back." There was a beat of silence, then a professional but curious tone. "How far back?" "My husband died in 2013. He left behind 2 wills and I found the first one. It names me." She paused, watching a squirrel dart across the fence line outside. "But I'm more interested in the title paperwork. I don't believe he finalized the transfer." Trevor's typing picked up almost immediately. "If that's true and there was no filed deed, it's possible the house still rests in probate. That would shift things, particularly if spousal rights were never relinquished." Ruth could hear her own heartbeat in the silence that followed, not from panic, from confirmation. Trevor asked for a scan of the documents. Ruth promised to get them to him within the day. After they hung up, she turned back to the filing cabinet. There was more in there than she'd remembered: old bank letters, tax forms, notarized receipts so yellowed they felt like parchment. She dug for nearly an hour before she found what she hadn't realized she was looking for: a narrow envelope marked "Loan, 2007" in Henry's unmistakable scrawl. Inside were 3 payment slips, all stamped, all paid. Ruth's signature was scrawled across each one, above the memo line that read, "Second mortgage payoff. Final." She stared at them as if they were photographs of a life no one else had witnessed. 12 years ago, Henry had taken out a second mortgage after a medical scare. He'd insisted it was just in case, a buffer. Ruth had paid every remaining installment after his stroke, quietly, without fanfare. Now it might be the reason this house still had a legal pathway back to her. She was still holding the envelope when Megan appeared in the doorway. Ruth hadn't heard the footsteps, only the sharpness of Megan's presence, like a breeze that turned cold without warning. "Hey," Megan said, arms folded across her cropped sweatshirt. "We've got guests coming tonight, clients. The house needs to stay tidy and, well, I think it's best if you keep to your room, okay?" Her voice was light, coated in false concern. Ruth looked up from her papers and offered a slow, polite smile. "Of course." Megan gave a short nod, satisfied but not fooled, and disappeared back down the hallway. Ruth waited until the footsteps faded. Then she pulled out a manila folder and labeled it, "Property and Probate. Active." That afternoon, Lana arrived carrying a tin, foil-covered plate. "I had extra buttermilk left over," she said breezily, placing the warm bundle on Ruth's table. "Thought I'd use it on something that actually feeds people." She eyed Ruth for a moment, then noticed the stack of documents, half-organized and meticulously arranged, sitting beside a black binder Ruth had started the night before. "What's all that?" Lana asked gently, but with an edge of curiosity. "Proof," Ruth said quietly. "Or a start, at least." Lana didn't push. She just pulled out a chair and sat down with a biscuit, breaking it open slowly as steam rose between them. "Sometimes," Lana said after a moment, "we think the things we gave up are gone, but turns out they were just sitting in a drawer, waiting for us to look harder." Ruth didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her phone buzzed beside the binder. A new email from Trevor. Subject: "Confirmed. No title transfer on record." Ruth's hand hovered over the phone, her eyes unreadable. Then she reached for her pen and began writing at the top of the legal pad. Options: reinstatement versus challenge. By dusk, the house was humming with preparation, the sound of chairs being shifted, glassware clinking in sync, and Megan's clipped voice giving Instructions echoed faintly into Ruth's garage quarters. From her window she could see Doug standing in the driveway beside a row of SUVs, greeting arriving guests like he was hosting a red carpet. He wore the same navy sport coat Ruth had seen him use for listing photos. Shoulders back, teeth white, every gesture practiced down to the half-second pause before a handshake. Inside, music played low but expensive, jazz curated by algorithm and intention. Ruth sat at her table, the overhead bulb casting a cone of soft yellow on her open binder. She could hear laughter drifting from the kitchen, where Megan's voice carried just a bit louder than anyone else's. She wasn't surprised she hadn't been asked to join. She hadn't even been informed. But what settled in her chest wasn't hurt anymore. It was something slower, firmer. A kind of confirmation she could now stop hoping for civility from people who only offered performance. She stood and walked to the kitchenette, filling the electric kettle with water for tea. Her fingers moved without urgency. She already knew what she would do tonight. Not in response to the party, but alongside it. She didn't need their invitation. She had something stronger. On the table sat a notarized form Lana had helped her draft earlier that morning. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even confrontational. It simply affirmed Ruth's intent to explore ownership rights tied to unresolved probate, noting the absence of title transfer following her husband's death. 1 page, 3 paragraphs, clean, factual language. Trevor had reviewed it that afternoon and given her the name of a local notary. Lana, true to form, had driven her. "It's not about getting loud," Lana had said, adjusting her reading glasses as she signed beside the witness line. "It's about getting documented." Now, hours later, Ruth slid the finished form into her growing binder, nestled under the tab labeled Timeline of Exclusion. She'd begun organizing her file with color-coded dividers, something she hadn't done since she worked front desk at the county clinic 30 years ago. The neatness calmed her. The sound of Doug's voice caught her ear again, closer this time, rising with pride as he addressed the group gathered around the open-concept kitchen. "We gutted the whole space last year. Took everything down to the studs. It was a real passion project for us." "We." Ruth didn't flinch. She simply walked to the window and looked out again. The string lights Megan had installed last spring glittered above the patio, casting a soft, glowing hue over the party. Trays of hors d'oeuvres balanced on reclaimed wood boards were being passed around by servers in matching black aprons. Ruth caught a glimpse of the giant floral centerpiece on the dining table and recognized the vase. It had once belonged to her mother-in-law. Megan had painted it matte black. Back at the table, Ruth picked up her phone and opened Instagram. It took less than a minute to find what she expected. Megan had posted a group photo. 6 smiling faces posed beneath the patio lights. Doug stood behind her with one hand on her waist. Everyone looked polished, successful, intentional. The caption read, "Our Kingdom." No mention of Ruth, no credit for the house Henry built, just another curated erasure. Ruth took a screenshot, saved it, added it to the album, Access and Exclusion. Then, with a slow steadiness, she stood, walked to the mirror above her dresser, and looked at the small envelope taped to the corner. Megan's wedding invitation. Cream-colored cardstock, gold foil edges. She'd left it there out of some vague sense of duty. Tonight, she peeled it off. She didn't tear it, didn't toss it, just slid it into the trash gently, like it no longer belonged to her version of the story. The kettle clicked off behind her. She poured the hot water over a tea bag and stirred once, then set the spoon down carefully. Across the room, her binder remained open, the notarized form now placed at the front. Ruth took a sip of her tea and walked back to her chair. The party raged on next door. She began typing a short email to Trevor. Subject, form attached, timeline begins tonight. The envelope was plain, no dramatic seal, no heavy cardstock, just a white 9x12 mailer slipped discreetly between a water bill and an Arbor Day flyer. Ruth recognized the return address before she even opened it. Peoria County Courthouse, Civil Division. Her hands didn't shake. She slit the top with the same letter opener she'd used for years, careful not to tear the contents. Inside, a 3-page letter bearing the court seal and a bold headline halfway down the page. Petition for reinstatement of spousal estate rights. Preliminary approval granted. She read the paragraph twice, her eyes resting on the sentence that mattered most. This property shall now be subject to full ownership review under surviving spouse claims, effective immediately. No gavel slams, no dramatic music, just quiet, printed proof that her silence had finally carried weight. Across the street, Lana was tending to her window boxes, pinching the dry ends from a geranium. Ruth opened the garage door just enough to step into the sun and raise a quiet hand. Lana looked up, saw the envelope in Ruth's grasp, and nodded once, not with surprise, with understanding. By noon, Trevor had done what Trevor did best, moved quickly, quietly, legally. A notice, official and laminated, was posted to the front door of the main house. It was affixed with blue tape in all four corners. Bold type, case number. Language that wrapped around phrases like temporary injunction, probate reassessment, and asset determination in progress. The paper hadn't been on the door for more than 2 minutes when Megan's voice cracked across the quiet neighborhood. "What the hell is this?" Ruth heard it from the kitchen window, where she was brewing fresh coffee. Doug's voice joined, lower but sharper. "This is real. This is a real legal thing." Ruth stepped outside, holding her mug like it belonged there. Megan and Doug stood in the driveway, both still in athletic wear, frozen mid-exit like actors yanked off script. "She can't do this!" Megan snapped, her voice shrill. "Can she?" Ruth tilted her head slightly, expression unreadable. "I already did." Megan's mouth fell open. Her entire body shifted, like something inside her couldn't quite process that the power had moved. Doug turned to Ruth, his voice all corporate calm with a hairline crack. "There has to be a mistake. We've been managing this property for—" "You've been residing here," Ruth interrupted, her tone still even. "The managing part? That's what the court is looking into." Across the street, Lana stood at her mailbox, sunglasses on, arms folded, watching, just like Ruth had watched from her own window night after night. A Peoria PD cruiser pulled to the curb 15 minutes later. Nothing dramatic, no sirens, just a scheduled verification call, standard procedure for posting contested estate notices. The officer, a young man with a polite tone, confirmed the case number, photographed the notice, and spoke briefly with Ruth. "Just formality, ma'am," he said after shaking her hand. "We do this with property transitions that hit review. It's part of the chain." Megan hovered on the porch like someone waiting to wake up. Her phone hung loose in her hand. Doug kept pacing. The officer made no eye contact with either of them. When he left, Ruth remained standing by the walkway. She could feel Megan watching her. The notice still fluttered faintly on the doorframe. Then came the sound of fast steps and a rustle of paper. Ruth turned just in time to see Megan storm across the driveway, hand balled around the document like she was choking it. "You're ruining everything," Megan hissed, her voice low but venom-laced. She hurled the folded paper at Ruth's feet like it burned to touch it. "Do you even care what this does to us?" Ruth looked down at the notice, then back at Megan. Her face didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, nearly kind. "I care about what was mine, what stayed mine, even when you pretended it wasn't." For a moment, Megan looked like she might spit back something cruel, something cutting, but nothing came. Doug said nothing either. His eyes flicked between them like he was waiting for someone else to explain the rules. Instead, Ruth bent down, picked up the paper, and refolded it neatly. She walked inside, closed the door, and slid the notice into her binder beneath a new tab she'd created that morning. It read, "Posted, July 14th. Public acknowledgement begins." It started with a set of sheets. Ruth carried them folded in her arms. Pale blue, crisp cotton, still faintly scented with lavender from the cedar trunk in her storage bin. She walked slowly through the house, her slippers brushing across the polished wood floors she hadn't stepped on freely in over a year. Megan and Doug were gone. A conference in Chicago, according to the dry erase calendar near the fridge. 3 nights. Ruth didn't hesitate. The main bedroom sat at the back of the house, west-facing, quiet. When she opened the door, it creaked slightly, just enough to remind her this house had once been a home, not a showpiece. The bed had been reupholstered since she last slept in it. The curtains were new, but the bones were the same. She stripped the decorative pillows, smoothed the fitted sheet, and pulled the comforter up like she had for 25 years before Megan decided she was too much to live with. On the nightstand, a crystal lamp clicked on with a warm glow. She stood still for a long moment, then sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers pressing into the mattress she and Henry had shared. The silence didn't feel like an intrusion. It felt earned. Down the hallway, the kitchen waited. She opened the fridge, her fridge by legal review now, and took out chicken thighs, half a bunch of kale, and garlic. She poured herself a glass of iced tea and began to cook like she hadn't in years, without glancing over her shoulder, without asking permission. By the time the sun dipped below the maple trees, the house smelled of lemon, paprika, and browned butter. She plated her food, sat at the kitchen island beneath the pendant lights, and took the first full bite she'd had under this roof since before Henry's funeral. She was halfway through her meal when the sound of tires crunched on gravel. The door opened. Megan's voice rang out, "I don't care, Doug, it's a legal form, not a verdict." She turned the corner, then stopped cold. There was Ruth, calmly chewing, napkin on her lap, a glass of tea beside her plate. The overhead lights reflected softly off the glass backsplash behind her. Megan blinked as though seeing a ghost. "You're in the kitchen." Ruth didn't look up. "I am." Megan's hand clutched the strap of her bag. "You're in the main house." "In my house." Ruth set down her fork, finally meeting her daughter's eyes. "According to county records, I'm not trespassing. You might want to brush up on the difference." Doug appeared behind Megan, eyes scanning the room like he'd walked into a crime scene. "What's going on?" Ruth stood, picked up her plate, carried it to the sink. "You'll want to check the notice again, and the update that went live this morning." She didn't wait for a response. She simply walked past them, calm as driftwood, and returned to the master bedroom, where her sheets were already tucked and the lamp was still glowing. By morning, Lana had arrived with her purse full of tools and a small locksmith's kit she hadn't used since her husband passed. "No fanfare," she said, flipping her glasses up onto her head. "Just a little reinforcement where it counts." Ruth handed her a fresh cup of coffee. Back and side doors, no rush. By noon, the locks had been changed. The garage entry rekeyed, the codes reset. Ruth placed a new set of keys into an envelope marked "Emergency Only" and slipped it into the drawer beneath the silverware tray. Later that afternoon, Trevor called. Doug would need to vacate until the title hearing was resolved. Spouses and bloodlines only. Ruth didn't smile, but she didn't argue either. By that evening, Doug was gone. Megan remained, angrier, quieter. She posted a black square on Instagram with the caption, "Sometimes your own blood is poison. Toxic parent, boundary season." Ruth saw it, screenshot it, archived it, but she didn't reply. Instead, she made herself a new folder. Not digital. This one was a manila envelope marked in her handwriting. Transition phase, occupancy records. Inside, she placed a printout of the property injunction, the lock change receipt, and a photo Lana had taken of Ruth standing at the kitchen island, smiling faintly, fork in hand. The glow of the kitchen pendant lights was dimmed now, set to warm amber, soft enough to feel like peace, but bright enough for focus. Ruth sat at the island again, this time not to eat, but to scroll. Her reading glasses slid slightly down her nose as she moved through Megan's social media profiles with quiet precision. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. But she was thorough. Each post was a breadcrumb Megan had left, unthinking in her vanity. Weekend at our place. Home sweet open concept. Built this life with love and patience. Ruth tapped each image, saved the full caption, and dated it. Then she organized them in her Access and Exclusion album, now 43 items strong. Photos of the kitchen, the garden Ruth once planted, the repainted den, Even the chandelier Ruth and Henry had chosen during a Memorial Day sale 15 years ago, every photo claimed by Megan as a product of her own doing, every one of them a lie. Trevor had requested a sample batch. Proof of misrepresentation, he'd called it. Ruth emailed him 20 screenshots in a zipped file titled, "Implied ownership by non-title party." He replied 3 hours later, "Perfect. Included in formal response brief. Keep gathering." Across the hall, Megan's door slammed for the second time that day. Doug had returned briefly to pack an overnight bag. He'd spent 20 minutes in the guest room and 7 minutes on his phone, trying to wipe his tagged photos from Megan's posts. But it was too late. Trevor had already archived the major links. Several screenshots were time-stamped with locations and dates that aligned perfectly with the house's tax records. The evidence now had its own tab in Ruth's binder, Public Assertions versus Legal Title. Doug had looked pale on his way out. Not guilty, just exposed. He muttered something about needing to call his broker, then left without saying goodbye. By sunset, Ruth heard shouting. At first, she ignored it, but the thud of something hitting a wall forced her to pause. She walked quietly down the hallway toward the front of the house, where Megan stood in the living room with her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "She's senile," Megan barked into the receiver, pacing in socked feet. "This is abusive. She's manipulating the system, and it's going to ruin everything. We had momentum. We had offers." She stopped mid-rant, as if realizing how loud she was. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway. They met Ruth's briefly. No one spoke. Megan turned back and lowered her voice. "She's not well. I'll get her out. Just give me a few days." Ruth turned away. She didn't slam a door, didn't raise her voice. She simply walked back into the master bedroom and picked up her purse. She took the bus downtown. There, inside the municipal annex building, she found the small laminated sign taped above a classroom door. "Legal Aid Free Clinic, Elder Advocacy and Property Disputes." She didn't use her last name. The woman behind the sign-in table smiled, passed her a clipboard, and pointed to a stack of forms with highlighter marks. Ruth filled out every field. An hour later, she sat across from a young woman in a navy cardigan who listened, really listened, as Ruth described her situation. "You're not alone," the woman said after a moment, her voice quiet but firm. "It happens more than people think, but it sounds like you're already ahead." Ruth nodded. Her hands didn't shake, her voice didn't crack. She had the folder with her. She didn't even have to open it this time. By the time she got home, the house was dark. Megan's car was still in the driveway, but the lights were off. Ruth stepped into the kitchen and found a note from Lana on the counter. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Let's get your statement in writing." The kitchen was just the beginning. L. Ruth folded the note and slipped it into the front pocket of her binder. She walked to the fridge, poured a glass of water, and stood in the doorway of the living room, looking at the spot where Megan had screamed hours earlier. She didn't smile, but something in her face settled. She was no longer reclaiming a room. She was reclaiming the narrative. The silence that morning was colder than usual. Ruth stood at the thermostat in the main hallway and pressed the down arrow twice. The furnace didn't click on. It wasn't broken. It had been disconnected, along with the gas line, the hot water heater, and the kitchen's electric stove. She'd filed the utility change request the day after the notice went up. A quiet visit to the Peoria Energy Cooperative, folder in hand, ID and documentation prepared. The clerk, a woman with cropped hair and a quick smile, had looked over the pages and nodded slowly. "So you're transferring it out of your name?" "No," Ruth had answered, calm and direct. "I'm closing the account. The title is under review, the balance is mine, and I've paid it off. But I'm no longer supplying what I'm being locked out of." The clerk blinked once, then said, "We'll process that immediately." By afternoon, the house began to change. Water slowed to a sputter. Gas pressure dropped. The stove igniters clicked and clicked, but never lit. In her quarters, Ruth placed a fresh grocery bag on the counter, delivered from a local co-op. Her new standing order came twice a week: prepared meals, local produce, sealed entrees. Enough for herself, no one else. She unpacked a container of turkey and squash risotto, a side of sautéed green beans, and a thick slice of lemon cornbread. The bag was labeled neatly in handwriting, Palmer, Garage Suite. Across the house, Megan opened the fridge and gasped, "There's nothing in here." Doug's voice echoed from the laundry room. "No hot water either." The power was still running. Ruth had left the electricity untouched. Let them see their shadows clearly. Doug found her in the hallway, blocking her path near the coat closet, trying his old trick of being both charming and menacing. It didn't land the same. "You'll lose us over petty meals?" he said, arms crossed, voice flat. "Really?" Ruth met his gaze evenly. "You lost me first, you just didn't notice." Doug opened his mouth to speak, but Ruth had already stepped around him. The conversation, like the dinner they had planned for themselves, was done. That evening, Megan attempted to rally. She lit candles, called a few of her real estate friends, and tried to schedule a networking wine night in the living room. But the room felt too cold, the stove too still. One by one, the guests canceled, some politely, others vaguely. Ruth had noticed the shift starting a few days ago. Megan's blog, once glossy and self-congratulatory, had taken a darker tone. Long posts about being misunderstood, quotes about betrayal, hashtags like #false narratives and #trust your gut accompanied filtered photos of empty wine glasses and messy buns. But then Ruth saw a post that changed the calculus. "Remodeling Mom's property has been a journey, but claiming space matters. My house, chalk built it myself." The photo showed Megan in front of the kitchen island, posing like she was on the cover of a design magazine. Ruth recognized the timing. The shot was taken the day of the Our Kingdom party. This time, she didn't just screenshot it. She opened her binder, found the page labeled Misrepresentation, Monetized Channels. Then she printed the post. Trevor had told her what to do if the posts crossed into monetization, if they blurred ownership for profit. Ruth drafted a cease and desist letter using the template from the legal clinic, folded it neatly, and slid it into a stamped envelope addressed to Megan's LLC. She walked it to the mailbox herself, flag raised. Later that night, she heard Megan slam her laptop shut in the next room. A few minutes later, her door opened. Megan stood there, arms folded, face drawn with exhaustion. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said. "You didn't have to humiliate me." Ruth looked up from her chair. Her tone was steady, her voice clear. "I didn't humiliate you," she said. "I removed the parts you staged. There's a difference." Megan didn't speak again. She closed the door harder than necessary. Ruth reached for her planner and circled Friday. Trevor had scheduled a deposition review. One more step toward reclaiming everything. The courtroom was quiet in that specific padded way, where even shuffling paper sounded too loud. Ruth sat near the center, spine straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a navy cardigan and a brooch shaped like a maple leaf. Lana sat behind her, one row back, fingers laced around a canvas tote and a pen that had no notebook to write in. She didn't need one. She remembered everything. Trevor stood near the bench, his voice clear but measured as he handed the judge a printed file. "This is the certified copy of Henry Palmer's last recorded intention. The original title change was never completed. We are asking for ownership reversion under spousal estate rights." The judge was a man in his early 60s with half-moon glasses and a face shaped by habit. He read slowly, flipping pages while the room held still. Megan sat on the far side with a lawyer Ruth hadn't seen before. Young, too smooth, not familiar with local nuance. Megan had shown up in an expensive blazer and earrings Ruth recognized from Henry's birthday dinner 3 years before his death. She hadn't looked at Ruth once. The judge cleared his throat. "The record confirms, no final deed transfer on file, mortgage paid in full by the surviving spouse, estate clause language consistent with initial intent." He paused. "The property shall revert immediately to Ruth A. Palmer." There was no reaction from Ruth. No sigh of relief. No closing of eyes. Only a slow, clean inhale. Across the aisle, Megan sat frozen. Her lips parted, just slightly. Her attorney leaned in to whisper something, but she didn't seem to hear. Doug, who had joined late and stood in the back of the courtroom, quietly turned and walked out. By noon, the paperwork had been certified. By 2, the county site listed Ruth as the sole owner of the property. That evening she changed everything. Every lock, every passcode, every system Megan had once claimed as hers was wiped and reset. Lana arrived with a moving dolly and gloves. "You want me to start upstairs?" she asked. "No," Ruth said, standing in the center of the living room. "Let's start with what she leaves behind first. Then we'll pack the rest." Megan hadn't spoken since they returned from court. She remained in her room most of the day, the door closed, blinds drawn. But the front entry was wide open, and by dusk, her things were stacked neatly on the porch. 2 duffel bags, a garment rack of dresses, boxes labeled in pink Sharpie. Ruth had placed a folded linen on top to cover the open flaps, her version of courtesy. Lana carried the last box with a soft grunt and set it beside the others. "You want a sign?" she asked. "So she doesn't pretend it's a misunderstanding?" Ruth pulled one from a folder she had printed at the UPS store that morning. It was laminated, black type on white cardstock, bold, simple. Owner, R. Palmer, entry by permission only. She taped it to the glass panel beside the front door, her hands steady. From the porch, Megan finally emerged, barefoot, wearing one of Doug's old flannels like armor. "You're actually doing this," she said. Her voice was quiet, stunned. Ruth didn't look away. "I'm finishing what your father started." Megan glanced at the boxes. "Doug left." "I know. He doesn't want to be part of a public spectacle." "Good, neither do I." For a moment, Megan looked like she might cry. Not out of grief, but disbelief, like the mirror had cracked too wide for her to arrange her reflection. Ruth picked up the keys, her keys now, and walked back inside, leaving the door ajar behind her. Lana joined her in the kitchen, wiping her hands with a dish towel. "It's like Aaron here again," she said. Ruth nodded, then opened the fridge. It was full. She reached in and pulled out a jar of apricot jam Henry had loved, the last one they'd bought together from a roadside stand in Morton. She unscrewed the lid, spread it on a piece of warm bread, took a bite. Across the room, her binder lay open on the counter. She slipped in one last page. Title change confirmed. Date of legal transfer, July 21st. The RSVP list began to shrink before Megan even noticed. It started with the florist, then the tent company, then the jazz trio her planner had sourced from Chicago. Authentic but tasteful. Each cancellation came with carefully worded language. Scheduling conflicts, unexpected logistical issues. One of the caterers sent back a deposit with a short note that read, "Respectfully withdrawing from this event due to unresolved venue clarity." That was the word they all kept using. Clarity. Doug had been gone for over a week. No calls, no texts. Just a quiet disappearance that Megan refused to name. She carried on with fittings and tastings, making loud phone calls from the patio and snapping passive-aggressive selfies in front of the fireplace. One way or another, it's still happening. Manifesting. Ruth watched from the window as vendors came and went, some leaving sooner than planned, most with a slightly dazed look, like they'd just stepped out of a pitch meeting that collapsed mid-sentence. One morning, Ruth opened a plain envelope addressed to her from a legal service Trevor had contacted on her behalf. It contained a court-enforced refund. Back rent, suite conversion, paid in full. Trevor had been methodical. The conversion of the garage into a livable space had originally been pitched by Megan as generosity, but Ruth had covered the heating, the insulation, and paid for half the structural permits under the promise of shared rights. Trevor made sure the court recognized that. Now, Ruth folded the check and placed it into her binder under the tab labeled Reimbursement, Equity by Misrepresentation. That afternoon, she called a linen rental service and canceled the remaining balance on 3 reception tables. "I'm the one who paid the deposit," she said calmly. "And the card's under my name. The wedding's been relocated indefinitely." The man on the other end didn't argue. He'd seen enough messes to know the sound of a woman pulling her name out of a story. By the end of the week, the event had gone from a 75-person estate gathering to a possible brunch pop-up at a friend's house. Doug never showed up to the final tasting. When the baker called to confirm flavor selections, Megan answered with brittle charm. "He's just overwhelmed with work. He's still in, of course." But he wasn't, and she knew it. The following night, Ruth made a cup of peppermint tea and opened her laptop, mostly out of habit. What she saw stopped her hand mid-reach for the honey jar. Megan had posted a photo on Facebook, a blurred picture of a bouquet thrown against a wooden fence. Her caption read, "I gave my whole life to people who only showed up when it served them. You think you know love. Then you learn it's conditional. Good luck, Peoria. I'm done pretending." Within 20 minutes, the comments section flooded in. Some with sympathy, most with questions, many with screenshots. Someone posted a screenshot of the Our Kingdom post with a timestamp. Another commented, "Weren't you just calling your mom toxic last week?" Someone else linked the real estate listing that had quietly gone down. Another posted the wedding registry, now marked canceled. By morning, the post had been ratioed, and Megan had turned off comments. Ruth didn't say a word. She didn't even save it. She didn't have to anymore. Later that day, Lana stopped by with a stack of mail Ruth had accidentally forwarded to her place. Among the bills and flyers was a small cream-colored envelope with gold edges, leftover wedding stationery Megan must have used to send out a final RSVP update. Ruth opened it. Inside was a blank card. No message, no handwriting, just emptiness inside a shell. She placed it on the table, then looked up at Lana. "She's flailing," Lana said, not unkindly. "She's spiraling," Ruth corrected. Lana pulled out a chair, then reached for the untouched card and held it up to the light. "Pity doesn't make people innocent." Ruth nodded. She placed the blank card into a new folder she'd labeled just that morning. "Closure, unsent apologies." She clipped it shut, stood, and walked to the window. Outside, the front porch was empty. No deliveries, no duffel bags, just stillness. The smell of primer and open wood grain replaced the scent of lavender cleaner in the kitchen. Ruth stood barefoot on the covered floorboards, a swatch of paint samples fanned across the marble counter like playing cards. The old backsplash was gone, stripped clean with the help of a chisel and determination, and the overhead light now flickered with exposed wires, waiting for something warmer to take its place. "Soft gray," Lana said, tapping the third sample from the left. "It won't glare, won't age, and it makes everything around. It feel deliberate." Ruth didn't answer right away. She turned the swatch toward the window, let the afternoon sun hit it just right. Then she nodded. "Soft gray," she repeated, "with copper." Lana smiled. "Statement choice." "It's not a statement," Ruth said. "It's a correction." The renovation took 5 days. Not a gut job, just refinements, new fixtures, paint, a fridge that didn't groan like it was holding a grudge. The counter edges were now beveled. The sink, once prone to clogs and cosmetic upgrades, gleamed with a deep basin and an arched faucet with a magnetic pull-down. At the hardware store, the clerk behind the paint counter recognized her from the newsletter Lana had forwarded to him weeks ago. "You're the one who took back the Palmer place," he said, smiling as he rang up the copper pendant lights. "We heard what you did." He gave her a discount without her asking. On day 6, Lana arrived with a clipboard and a box truck-sized grin. "We're not just replacing parts," she said. "We're naming them, like ships." Ruth raised an eyebrow as Lana tapped on the gleaming new refrigerator door. "This one's Control Z." Ruth let out a small laugh. "Like the keyboard shortcut?" "Exactly. Undo." Later that week, Trevor hosted a small elder rights seminar at the downtown library. Ruth was listed third on the program. When it was her turn, she stepped up to the podium, her speech folded cleanly in her hand. "I was told to keep this short," she began. "So I will." She looked at the crowd, mostly women, a few men, all over 50, all with expressions that carried weight. "I lived in a home that I legally owned but emotionally rented. For years. Out of habit, out of guilt, out of love even. And when I stopped feeding that story, I was told I was being cruel." She paused. But cruelty isn't when you stop giving. It's when you're expected to give without being seen. A few nods. 2 murmurs of approval. She continued, voice steady. I didn't call this reclaiming space. I called it restoring boundaries. Applause followed, not loud but genuine. When Ruth returned home that evening, the kitchen glowed softly in its new light. The walls looked cooler now, sharper but calmer, like they remembered themselves. She poured a glass of water and reached for the lemon bowl when she noticed something on the side porch camera feed. A blur. A figure. She stepped closer to the tablet mounted beside the door, tapped to rewind. The security footage played in silence. Megan, wearing a hoodie, crouched beside the trash bins, her face partially covered. She wasn't trying to break in, yet, just lingering, hovering near the motion light like a moth unwilling to land. Ruth watched the clip twice, then she tapped the police contact tile. A calm voice answered. Peoria PD Dispatch. Ruth spoke clearly. There's someone on my property. She's not authorized to be here. It's on camera. Name? Megan Palmer, my daughter. Is she trying to enter? She's trespassing, Ruth said. The boundaries are clear. The dispatcher paused. Understood. Unit en route. Ruth ended the call and stood by the doorway, her hands relaxed. She didn't need to run, didn't need to raise her voice. The system she once feared now moved for her. 10 minutes later, flashing lights filled the side yard. From the window, Ruth watched Megan's silhouette disappear around the hedges, swallowed by the dark. No pounding on the door, no confrontation, just absence. Ruth didn't move. Instead, she walked to the fridge, pulled open the drawer, and took out the slice of chocolate tart Lana had dropped off that morning. She plated it neatly, sat at the island, and took the first bite beneath the glow of copper light. The table was set for one. Ruth lit a single candle in the center, unscented, white, steady, and adjusted the cloth napkin folded beside her plate. The light above the island was turned low, casting soft gold onto the copper fixtures and gray tile. A playlist hummed gently from the Bluetooth speaker in the corner, old jazz standards she remembered from when Henry used to hum along during Sunday chores. On the stove, rosemary chicken rested in a cast-iron pan, crisped at the edges, with roasted carrots and parsnips layered beneath. It wasn't a meal for company. It wasn't meant to impress. It was what she craved, cooked how she liked it. No substitutions, no restrictions, no one watching over her shoulder. She plated the dish slowly, wiped a smear of sauce from the rim with her thumb, and carried it to the table. She didn't sit right away. She stood for a moment, fingers brushing the back of the chair, taking in the space around her. The kitchen was hers again. Fully, quietly, undeniably. She sat. Outside, dusk had settled like a blanket, soft and wide, turning the hedges into shadows. Inside, the house felt warm for the first time in years. She was halfway through her meal when a soft knock came at the front door. Lana entered carrying a round tin and a bottle of cider. "Still warm," she said, lifting the lid to reveal a glistening apple pie with a lattice top. "I added bourbon to the filling. Hope that doesn't make me a bad influence." Ruth chuckled. "It makes you exactly the influence I needed." Lana placed 2 forks on the counter and poured the cider into mismatched tumblers. They sat on the bar stools, side by side, the pie between them, steam rising slowly in the quiet. "2 boundaries," Lana said, raising her glass. Ruth tapped hers gently against it. "And to keeping them." They each took a bite. The crust flaked perfectly beneath Ruth's fork. The filling was tart, sweet, spiced just enough to feel like memory. Later, after Lana left, Ruth stood alone in the kitchen, her empty plate in the sink, her glass rinsed and turned upside down on the drying rack. The candle had burned halfway down, its flame still steady. She walked to the dining room hutch and opened the drawer beneath the old silverware set. Inside was a leather-bound journal, light gray, unused. She brought it to the island, opened to the first page, picked up her favorite pen. She didn't rush. Her handwriting had slowed over the years, but the motion was steady, precise. July 26th. First entry. Silence tastes like peace. She paused, then wrote again, smaller. Tonight I ate slow. I chewed without worry. I listened to myself and heard nothing shouting back. I think that's what healing sounds like. She closed the journal softly and slid it into the drawer near the stove. Her phone buzzed once. A single message. From Megan. I don't understand what I did wrong. Ruth stared at it for a long time. No greeting, no apology, no accountability. Just the same loop, one Megan had rewritten so many times she likely believed her own confusion. Ruth opened her camera, set her phone on the counter, took a photo. She made sure the frame caught 3 things: the plate wiped clean, the deed with its raised seal beside it, and her face, relaxed, smiling, eyes soft but certain. She sent the photo, no caption. Then she blocked the number. Trevor's name popped up on the screen a moment later. Trevor Marks. Estate docs finalized. Recorder's office has closed file. You're officially sole legal owner. Congratulations, Ruth. She didn't smile. Not the kind people give to cameras or crowds, but a warmth moved through her. Something fuller than satisfaction. Completion. Ruth stood, walked to the fridge and opened it with quiet ceremony. Rows of labeled jars, folded towels, ingredients that reflected only her. In the corner of the door, a magnet she'd picked up at the library gift shop last week, closed to chaos, open to calm. She adjusted it slightly, then stepped back. From the doorway, the kitchen glowed like memory reclaimed. The courthouse hallway smelled like printer ink and lemon floor wax. Ruth stood at the filing counter with her documents stacked in precise order, each tab marked with a small color-coded sticker. Her navy coat buttoned high against the chill of the building's central AC. She wasn't nervous, just aware of how final the moment was. The clerk glanced over the first page, then looked up. This bars any residual or secondary claim from non-heirs to the estate? Yes, Ruth said clearly. That includes Megan Palmer. I'm submitting under the revised severance clause attached to the 2023 Property Code amendments. The woman gave a short nod. Not surprised, just efficient. We'll certify and process by end of week. You'll receive a notice when the lockout is recorded. Ruth pressed her palm flat against the counter, felt the cool laminate beneath her fingers. It felt like closure, real this time, not emotional, legal. Behind her, someone shuffled papers. Phones rang softly. The world, it seemed, wasn't holding its breath for this ending, only she was. And now, even that had stopped. Outside, the air was damp with the start of August. She walked to her car slowly, keys already in hand. When she pulled into the driveway, the porch light blinked on, like the house had been waiting. Inside, Lana was halfway through painting a small wooden square with gold trim. She looked up as Ruth stepped through the door. "You did it?" she asked. Ruth nodded. "Last piece filed. She's legally out of the line. No appeals, no loopholes." Lana smiled and turned the plaque toward her. In cursive, still drying, were the words, "Warmed with respect." Ruth touched the edge of the wood lightly, her voice soft. "That's perfect." She walked to the kitchen wall, directly beneath the copper lights, and held the plaque there. They both nodded. Tomorrow, they'd mount it. The next morning, Ruth sat on the back porch with her journal open and a cup of tea growing lukewarm beside her. A new message buzzed in. Doug Palmer. "I'm not getting involved anymore. Please don't contact me again." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some silence was earned. Other silence was a gift. 10 minutes later, another notification appeared. Unknown number. "Hi, Ruth. I'm Andrew, your cousin Clara's son. We met once when I was little, I think. I'm passing through Illinois next month. Would love to stop by if you're open to it." She stared at the message for a moment. The idea of family that hadn't tangled themselves in ownership or judgment felt unfamiliar, but it didn't feel bad. She walked to the fridge, pulled a sticky note from the side panel, and scribbled a reminder. "Call Andrew. Say yes." Across the kitchen, the plaque leaned gently against the wall, paint fully dry now. That afternoon, she opened her contacts list, scrolled, found Megan's name. There was no anger, no final monologue, just a quiet clarity. She tapped Delete Contact. When the screen asked if she was sure, Ruth clicked yes. Not out of rage, but rhythm. The doorbell rang 10 minutes later. Lana stepped in with 2 mugs from the cafe down the street and a fresh stack of envelopes from the mailbox. "Nothing urgent," she said. "Except this." She handed Ruth a white envelope stamped from the county registrar. Ruth opened it. Inside, confirmation of the estate severance, recorded and bound. A line in bold read, "No future claims permissible under Clause 13C. Severance of descendant rights." She exhaled, not deeply, just naturally, like a body that no longer had to brace. Lana placed one of the mugs beside her and leaned on the counter. "You ready for quiet?" "I think I already have it," Ruth said. That night she walked the length of the house, checking each window, each lock. Not because she feared Megan might return, but because she no longer needed to keep anything open for someone who had walked out of love and into entitlement. At the front door, she paused, touched the new deadbolt Lana had installed just weeks ago, turned it once, firm, final. The lock clicked shut behind her, and this time, it stayed that way. The oven preheated with a low hum, a sound Ruth hadn't heard in months. She stood barefoot at the counter, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and measured flour by feel, not instinct, but memory. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and softened butter, with hints of vanilla hanging in the air like a warm secret. She was baking, not because it was expected, not for guests, just for herself. An apple crisp sat ready on the stove, its toppings scattered with oats and nutmeg. A second batch of shortbread cookies chilled in the fridge. Ruth moved deliberately between drawers, her apron streaked with flour, her hands steady. The air inside the house felt different now. Not quiet in the way that meant tension, but quiet in the way that meant peace. At 2:15, the doorbell rang. Ruth wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the front door to find a young woman standing with a canvas bag, an overfilled clipboard, and the look of someone trying very hard not to sweat through her cardigan. "Hi, Ms. Palmer? I'm Kelsey. I'm a law student interning at Trevor Mark's office. He said I could stop by?" Ruth gave a small nod and opened the door wider. "Come in. Shoes off, please." Kelsey stepped in quickly and glanced around with unguarded curiosity. "Wow, this place is beautiful. It looks like a real home, you know." Ruth smiled faintly. "It is." They sat at the kitchen island. Ruth served the first slice of apple crisp in a small ceramic bowl, still warm, the topping just beginning to crisp. Kelsey took a bite and nearly sighed. "This is unbelievable." Ruth poured 2 glasses of water, then pulled her binder from the side cabinet. It landed with a soft but purposeful thump. "You said you're studying estate litigation?" Ruth asked. "Trying to," Kelsey said sheepishly. "I've never seen a case like yours. Trevor said your documentation was textbook. He actually called it a living argument." Ruth opened to the second tab. "It wasn't an argument," she said. "It was just the truth in order." She flipped slowly through the pages, color-coded, dated, annotated in the margins, screenshots, affidavits, repair receipts, notarized forms. Ruth had even marked a few with sticky flags labeled teachable. Kelsey leaned in like a student at a masterclass. "This is incredible. Seriously, I don't think anyone teaches this kind of clarity." "They should," Ruth replied, "especially to women." At 5, Lana arrived. She walked in carrying a pot roast in one hand and a bouquet of snapdragons in the other. "Thought we could christen the new dining chairs," she said. "You haven't used them yet." Ruth nodded, turning to Kelsey. "Stay for dinner?" The young woman's eyes widened. "Oh, really? Are you sure?" "Certain." They sat at the oak table beneath the new pendant light, the roast carved, the crisp refilled, and cider poured into mismatched wine glasses from Lana's cupboard. The room buzzed softly, not with conversation, but with warmth. "To reclaiming what was always yours," Lana toasted, lifting her glass. Ruth raised hers in return. "And to knowing it the moment you feel it." Later that evening, after the dishes were done and Kelsey had hugged her twice before leaving, Ruth stepped into the front room and found a copy of the neighborhood newsletter tucked inside her screen door. The headline wasn't bold, just a single-column story tucked near the bottom. "Local resident restores historic family home after legal battle." It didn't name names, but it named Ruth. She folded the paper and slid it into the hutch drawer alongside her binder. Then she walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a wrapped frame that had sat unopened since the renovations. Inside was a photo of Henry taken at a county picnic 15 years ago, laughing, his sleeves rolled, standing beside a grill with a spatula in one hand and a crooked smile that looked like invitation. She hung the frame above the stove, centering it between the copper lights. The screws bit into the drywall with a satisfying finality. The glass caught the light. His eyes looked like they always had. Gentle, direct, real. Ruth stepped back, crossed her arms, looked around the kitchen once more. Then she lit a second candle. Not for warmth, for welcome. The smell of roasted garlic and thyme drifted through the quiet kitchen. Ruth moved calmly between the stove and counter, setting a single white plate beside a cloth napkin she had ironed that morning. The table was bare, except for a vase of fresh tulips from the co-op, and the small glass candle she always lit at dusk now, steady, flickering, unbothered. The fridge hummed softly behind her. Inside, everything had its place: cut fruit in glass containers, a full jug of iced tea, a lemon tart wrapped in waxed paper. The shelves weren't packed, but they were full, with things she liked, with things she chose. Outside, cicadas buzzed lazily. The late sun angled through the blinds, casting amber light across the tile. It was Sunday. She hadn't hosted a meal in months, not formally, not with invitations or expectations. And today wasn't either of those. Today was a return to something smaller, quieter. Not a celebration, but an arrival. She'd baked chicken with rosemary and a splash of white wine, roasted small red potatoes with cracked pepper and olive oil. The green beans were still warm in the skillet, tossed with almonds and a squeeze of lemon. No one was coming, but everything was made with care. She plated her dinner and sat at the table. There was no music, just the sound of the house breathing, the click of the ice maker, the faint creak of the wood floor beneath her chair, the breeze fluttering against the window screen. She chewed slowly, not out of grief or reverence, but because she could. Because no one would interrupt. Because the kitchen was hers. The second candle flickered beside her. Lana had dropped it off the day before, wrapped in brown paper with a note that read, "For meals that matter, even the ones with just one seat." Ruth had smiled and placed it on the table that afternoon without hesitation. Midway through her meal, there was a knock. She didn't jump. She wiped her mouth, set down her fork, and opened the front door to find Lana standing there in her denim jacket, holding a square envelope. "I know it's your dinner night," she said, "but I figured this could wait on your counter until tomorrow." "No rush." Ruth took the envelope. "You want to come in?" Lana shook her head. "Not tonight. I like knowing you've got this space now, for you." She smiled, turned, and walked back to her car without another word. Inside, Ruth opened the envelope. It was a thank you card. No long note. Just, "You didn't just reclaim a kitchen. You rebuilt a world." Signed, L. She placed the card beside the napkin holder, then walked to the hutch and opened the second drawer. From within, she pulled out the original deed. Not a copy. The real one. Raised seal, courthouse watermark, her name typed in bold. Ruth A. Palmer, sole owner. She brought it to the table and placed it beside the card. The candlelight caught the edges. No one else had ever bothered to center the kitchen in their story. It had been a utility, a backdrop, a weapon, a claim. But now, it was a sanctuary. She stood slowly and walked to the fridge. Adjusted a magnet Lana had given her last week, shaped like a cast-iron skillet. The message was simple, printed in block letters. Closed to disrespect, always stocked for peace. She smiled to herself. Not a grin, not a performance, just the smile of a woman whose house no longer whispered someone else's story. The kitchen lights dimmed slightly on their evening timer. She rinsed her plate, dried it with a towel, set it back in the cabinet where it belonged. No one would rearrange it, no one would claim it. The space around her didn't just feel full, it felt rightful. She turned out the lights, walked to the front door, and paused once more to check the lock. It clicked shut beneath her hand. No hesitation, no fear, No memory trying to rewrite itself, just Ruth, in her house with her key. And for the first time in a long time, that was all she needed. She locked the kitchen. I bought the house and kept the key forever.